What began as a routine federal pretrial hearing quietly transformed into a moment that witnesses would later describe as unreal, as if the courtroom itself sensed what was coming before anyone else did, because from the instant the defendant walked in, something felt wrong. The posture, the glances, the deliberate refusal to acknowledge the bench, it all signaled defiance, subtle at first, but unmistakable to those who spend their lives inside courtrooms. Judge Caldwell, a veteran of decades on the federal bench and a figure known more for restraint than reaction, proceeded exactly as he always had, calm, procedural, measured, working through preliminary matters with a patience that many believed was unbreakable. But that patience was being tested in ways that wouldn't become obvious until it was already too late. As the judge turned to the issue of pretrial compliance, the temperature in the room shifted. This was not a new concern. The defendant had already been warned before, quietly, formally, repeatedly, yet on this morning, instead of listening, he interrupted the judge mid-sentence. Not accidentally, not emotionally, directly, loudly, declaring that the court had no authority over him, that the proceeding itself was illegitimate, a statement so brazen that even seasoned reporters froze, pens hovering above notebooks as the room dropped into a stunned silence. For a brief moment, Judge Caldwell said nothing. Observers later described that pause as chilling, not because it was long, but because it felt deliberate, as if the judge were deciding whether this moment would end as a warning or as a turning point. He gave one chance, just one, calmly stating that respect for the court was not optional and that consequences would be immediate. That should have been the end of it. It wasn't. The defendant turned away from the bench, gestured dismissively toward the gallery, and continued speaking, as if daring the system itself to respond. That was the instant everything changed. Judge Caldwell's voice did not rise, but witnesses say it sharpened, becoming cold, final, unmistakable. Marshals, remove him now. The words were barely finished when U.S. Senate Raptors, Marshals already positioned near the side entrance, moved with practiced precision. The defendant looked stunned, as if he hadn't believed the moment would actually arrive. As officers closed in, the courtroom collectively realized this was no longer symbolic authority being exercised. This was real, physical, immediate. But even as the defendant was escorted away, something even more shocking was unfolding, something no one in that room expected to hear next. Judge Caldwell continued speaking, placing language on the record that instantly changed the stakes of the case, citing willful contempt, documented noncompliance, and a pattern of behavior that had reached its breaking point. This wasn't an emotional reaction. This was the activation of something long prepared. The judge began referencing missed check-ins, ignored conditions, prior warnings that had already expired. Lawyers in the room exchanged looks, realizing that this hearing had never been routine at all. As the marshals guided the defendant toward the exit, the judge's words landed with devastating clarity, setting the stage for what would follow and signaling that the consequences about to be imposed would go far beyond removal from a courtroom. The silence that followed was not confusion, it was recognition. Something irreversible was happening, and everyone present knew they were witnessing the opening moments of a legal collapse that would ripple far beyond those walls. As the defendant was escorted toward the holding area, the tension inside the courtroom didn't dissipate, it intensified because Judge Caldwell was not finished, and everyone in that room could feel it. With the marshals still flanking the defendant, the judge continued speaking, his words deliberate and devastating, declaring that bail was revoked effective immediately, not after a recess, not after a separate hearing, but right then, in real time. A move so rare that even veteran attorneys struggled to process what they were hearing. Freedom vanished in the same breath as authority was reasserted. Observers later said it felt less like a ruling and more like a line being drawn across the entire proceeding, a moment where patience officially expired and consequences arrived all at once. The judge cited a pattern, not a single act, referencing missed pretrial check-ins, incomplete disclosures, ignored directives, and conduct that, taken together, painted a picture of someone unwilling to comply with even the most basic conditions of release. As the defendant continued speaking, insisting he was being silenced, Judge Caldwell immediately placed that conduct on the record as further evidence of disruption, noting that it would factor into future considerations should the case proceed to sentencing. Reporters in the gallery described the atmosphere as electric, the kind of charged stillness where no one moves because everyone understands history is being made in real time. When the side door finally closed behind the defendant, Judge Caldwell didn't pause to explain or justify himself to the room. He simply turned to the remaining attorneys, announced a brief recess, and stated that the court would resume with pending motions as scheduled, as if removing a defendant and revoking bail mid-hearing was merely the inevitable conclusion of a long-documented pattern. In the hours that followed, speculation exploded. Some claimed the written order had already been drafted. Others whispered that investigators had been preparing for this outcome for weeks. Whether those claims were true or not almost didn't matter because the impact was immediate and undeniable. Legal analysts began dissecting every second of the exchange, calling it a masterclass in judicial authority, while defense attorneys across the country quietly warned clients that federal courtrooms are not arenas for defiance. Comparisons to infamous courtroom confrontations of the past surfaced quickly, but experts pointed out the difference. This time, the judge didn't escalate theatrics, he eliminated them entirely. By removing the defendant and revoking bail in one decisive act, Judge Caldwell ensured there would be no encore, no further disruption, no opportunity to turn the courtroom into a platform. As news of the incident spread, the message echoed far beyond that single courthouse. Authority compounds, warnings expire, patterns matter. And when a federal judge decides enough is enough, the consequences don't arrive gradually, they arrive all at once. What unfolded wasn't just about one defendant or one hearing. It was a reminder, delivered without spectacle but with absolute finality, that the courtroom belongs to the law, not to those who test it. And that defiance, when sustained long enough, eventually meets a response that cannot be undone.